Okay, so we will start such that we are not too late for the lecture of Pierre. Today we will continue the lectures of yesterday, continuing beyond thermospherical dynamo paradigm. So yesterday we have seen that we have puzzling observation in the solar system and beyond, which challenge the usual model where the magnetic field of planets and stars are driven by buoyancy forces. So, and we also see that small effects like tides in planets can drive vigorous flows, turbulence, and so maybe dynamo. So today we will see if this is the case, if indeed this turbulence is dynamo capable. We can't predict that without doing the simulation. And we will apply this kind of models to the moon and to the star Vega, because we only have 1 hour and 30 minutes. So the outline today is the following. So we will first, I'm sorry for that, start with theory. So maybe it will be a bit difficult early in the morning, but still we will start with that. Then we will see how the flow saturates. So what is the turbulence driven by this kind of forcing. Then we will see if they can drive a dynamo or not, because it's not obvious that these flows can drive a dynamo. And finally, we will apply these models to the moon, the past lunar dynamo. First, considering impact on the moon, and second, considering the precession. And finally, we'll consider the star Vega. And it's not the star which is interesting, it's the fact that we need to drive dynamos in a stably stratified fluid. And if it works, of course, it's good for Vega, but it is also good for the Earth, because if we have a stably stratified layer just below the mantle, just at the top of the core, it means that this layer is not is participating to the dynamo effect via this effect. Okay. So I start with a bit of theory. I'm sorry with that. Maybe we can just remind how it works. So just I remind you, what interests us is how such an elliptical streamline, which appears because of the deformation due to tides, how such simple things degenerate in such a complicated things. At first, we have simple things, and after a certain time, it explodes in a turbulent thing. Okay? So what it means? It means that an elliptical streamline, a priori, cannot exist. It is just destabilized in turbulence. So how can we check that theoretically? So I won't do all the details of the calculation, but the idea is that elliptical streamline or all the other mechanically forced flow is basically a solid body rotation, which exists because of the spin rate of the planet, and it's circular because the planets are at leading order circular, plus a small perturbation due to tides, due to precession, due to whatever, and the perturbation has an azimuthal wave number mb, a frequency omega b, and it is of small amplitude, of course, which dominates, it is a solid body rotation. Okay? So when we have something small, in theory, we do multiple scale analysis. So this is what we do here. We decompose the total flow as a base flow plus a small perturbation. The base flow here is the elliptical streamline, for instance, because we know exactly analytically how we can write elliptical streamline. We know exactly UB here. And of course, U prime, which is the perturbation, is of the order epsilon. It is of the same order of the perturbation here. Okay. So now we plug that into the Navier-Stokes equation. And because UB is a valid flow, then all the terms of the order UB cancel out. Okay? We have dUB dt plus this UZ cross UB plus blah 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 equal to minus nabla basic pressure. And all that just cancel out because UB is a flow, is a solution of the equation. Okay? So at the end, you end up with an equation for U prime, and the only cross term you have are due to the nonlinear terms. Of course, you have U prime dot nabla UB, UB dot nabla U prime, and this one is of order 2. Okay? So we will remove out. So at the end, this is the equation which governs the perturbation, and the goal here is to check if U prime will grow or not. Of course, we expect that it grows because we have seen that we have a turbulence at the end. So just to explain a bit, so here in orange you have the unforced linear operator. This is what gives the inertial modes. You've got Coriolis, you have discarded nonlinear effects. Here we are in an viscid field, we have no viscosity at all. And these terms here are the terms which force, okay, which force the flow. So the parametric forcing comes from this term, and you see here that UB, which is here, this term has the pulsation of omega b and the azimuthal wave number mb. Okay? So we can rewrite this equation like that with this term which governs the eigenmode and the forcing term which is of the order of epsilon. And in this symbol, in U, you have mb and omega b. It's okay? And this term is of order epsilon like the other. The question now, okay, we have linearized our Navier-Stokes equation, so it's simpler, we can tackle this theoretically. But under which condition can we have instability? Yet another difficult slide, but after that it will be more simple. So, because we know that we want to combine inertial waves, a good idea is to start with inertial waves. So here I write the inertial waves like that. So we have a spatial dependency, whatever it means, and a temporal dependency here. So it's periodic with the rate, with the pulsation omega g. And all the inertial modes are orthogonal. You have probably seen that with Philippe. If you haven't seen that, I tell you, we can demonstrate that they are all orthogonal, meaning that this relationship holds. And because they are orthogonal and because they are complete, we can write the flow on this basis. So I decompose my perturbation U prime. So it's the second decomposition. The total flow is that, UB plus the perturbation, and the perturbation, I decompose it on the basis of the inertial modes. Okay? So you have a lot of modes, and you can inject that in our linearized Navier-Stokes equation. And then you do the usual multiple scale analysis to see what remains. So at leading order here, you just see that you can't have any growth of C. Meaning that at this order, you don't have instability. So this order, if you stop at this order, you say, okay, elliptical streamline are stable, we don't have turbulence. But if you go to the next order, and if you project that on a second inertial mode, on a particular inertial mode, sorry, you have this equation. And here it's much more better because you see that if the right-hand side is non-zero, then you can have a growth of C, K, and then you can have a growth of U prime. Okay? So the idea is to check when this number, when this right-hand side is zero or not. And you will see that we will recover the condition we did have for the direct resonance. So if I write that the spatial dependency of the inertial mode here as an azimuthal wave number mg, you can see that here you have a frequency omega b, so you have to match this frequency such that it's okay. And you have the same for mb, such that this integral here is not zero. So at the end, I don't enter into the details, but the idea is really here, you have here a lot of modes. You have a particular mode here on which you have projected. So you really have two modes, and with these modes, you can make a growth of the perturbation. And the resonance conditions are the following. So you have a temporal matching between the frequency of the two modes and the basic flow frequency, the perturbation frequency, and a spatial matching between the azimuthal wave number. Okay? So it just means that the physical meaning is that they should see each other. The spatial dependency should be close, such that they see each other. If they are two different, you see that's zero, and the same for time. Okay, so last thing, you have seen with Philippe that inertial mode, and with me that inertial modes frequency are between -2 and 2. So it adds a supplementary condition here, because this is between -2 and 2, and it means that if you want to check that, to verify this equation, sorry, then the frequency has to be smaller than 4. So the instability, we will only see them in this allowed zone where the frequency of the perturbation is smaller than 4. And we will see now that it works if we do the experiment. So just remind you, so we have a rigid ellipsoid filled with water, spinning at a constant rate plus an oscillation, and if you sit on the ellipsoid, if you are on the frame of the ellipsoid, you see that the fluid particle moves along streamline like that. It oscillates like that with an amplitude epsilon with a frequency omega b. Okay, so this is the experiment. And when we measure the frequency of the flow at turbulence, you see here we oscillate at frequency 4, so you see here the base flow. Frequency is 4 here for omega b. And you see that we have two inertial modes here with the correct dependency for m and omega. So really it works. The experiments confirm the theory here. So we have obtained this diagram in the growth of the instability here. If I measure I should have shown that, but if I measure anything like the turbulence or the axial velocity, then you have 0 at the following because you have only elliptical streamline. Okay, so no vertical flow. So 0, 0. Suddenly you have an exponential growth. Okay, and this is when we do that. And after that, of course, it saturates at some value. Here, U grad U is negligible. And here it's saturated because U grad U is not negligible anymore. Okay, let's continue in the linear phase. So the linear phase is this one of the growth. So if now I change the frequency of the perturbation of the basic flow, you see that indeed. So sorry, what I show here is control parameter, amplitude of the oscillation, frequency of the oscillation. Okay, when it's blue, it's unstable. When it's red, you have no instability. It's laminar. You have only this flow, and you see that indeed above 4, you nearly have no instability at all. Okay, so really the allowed zone here is in this frequency range. The second interesting thing is that you don't have blue everywhere. You have red as well, meaning that you have to force strong enough, even if you are in the allowed zone, you have to force strong enough to have an instability. Okay? So why is that? Just because, remember, our analysis here is an inviscid analysis. You don't have viscosity. But if you re-eject viscosity in the theory, then the motor of the instability is epsilon, but the damping of the ellipticity of the instability is the viscosity. Okay? So basically it just means that the strength of the perturbation has to be larger than the damping due to viscosity. Okay? So if I use a fluid with a smaller viscosity, then of course the critical amplitude for the instability to appear would be smaller. It's okay for everyone? So here the take-home message for all this instability is that you have two conditions to verify. First, you have the resonance condition, and second, you have to be larger in epsilon. The perturbation amplitude has to be larger than any damping in the system. Magnetic diffusivity, viscosity, thermal diffusivity, and so on. And to finish with, you have this figure where we see visualization of the flow for different frequencies. So 2.4 here, 1.46 here, and so on. And you see that you have different kind of turbulence just because you excite different pairs of modes. Mg and Mk, the eigenmodes which are coupled, can vary all along this frequency, this range frequency. So you see what it's difficult for planet to predict which flow will grow just because you have a lot of possible resonance. You can do the simulation as well. We'll come back to how we can do such a simulation in ellipsoid, but let's say we know how to do so. In simulation, just because the damping, so the Ekman number, so the dimensionless viscosity, is larger than what we can do in experiment, we have less instability when we explore the range between 0 and 4 of frequency, but you still have instability, and this is how it looks like. So this is exactly what I just drew here. You have first the base flow, then the growth, then it saturates, and it oscillates like that. Okay? Okay, we have a bit the same for liberation in latitude. This was liberation in longitude. So this is the experiment. So you see that it is exactly what I've shown you yesterday. You've got a turntable, you've got an oscillating container, and you've got this oscillation in latitude. And you can do as well the simulation, and you see that you've got a resonance of okay, there is some music in the movie. So now, okay, fair enough, but do we have that in planets? Because maybe in planets you can tell, okay, epsilon is too small, the viscosity is too large, or magnetic diffusivity is too large, we won't have anything. So let's focus on liberation in longitude. So I've shown here a graph, a figure where I have the forcing and the viscous diffusion, which is the main damping for the thing we look at here. And when we are in the gray zone, it's unstable. When we are in the white zone, it's stable. And I have shown a lot of things, so maybe you you can't read, but there is the ocean, subsurface ocean of Europa, the core of Io, the ocean of Enceladus, Ganymede, because we have seen that Ganymede is challenging, Callisto, Titan, and some exoplanets. And you see what I told you yesterday, this is the range of parameters where we can do our experiments, and this is where our planets. So even doing experiments, which are usually more extreme than simulation in parameters, we are very far. We are 10 to the minus 4, 10 to the minus 5, and we need to go to 10 to the minus 15. So really, we hope that our theory is good enough to extrapolate on many orders of magnitude. But nobody does better, so this is the way we do. So you see, we have quite a good agreement for experiments with the theory on 2 decades, and we extrapolate. And of course, we have uncertainty on parameters for the planet and for this moon. So that's why we have error bar here. But even with the error bar, we can predict that, for instance, here this is the core of Ganymede. Okay, it is in a stable zone. We cannot expect any instability due to libration. Okay, so that discard this possibility. But at the same time, we can predict as well some things which are more certain. So I've written here, so the core of Io, which is the circle here, and the oceans of Enceladus and Europa are, according to this theory, unstable. So we can expect that we will have turbulence in the core of Io and the ocean of Europa and Enceladus. If we have turbulence, we have modification of the heat flux, mixing in the ocean. It will also erode the icy layer you have at the surface of Europa and Enceladus. So it will have a lot of consequences for the dynamics of these satellites. Okay. And what about libration in latitude? We are less lucky here. Nothing is unstable. So we have done all the work for nothing, but at least we can say, okay, this has no consequence. And why is that? Just because the forcing in this case is not strong enough. And what about tides? It was libration. What about tides? Tides, I shown here something a bit different. So I have again the forcing, unstable, stable zone, and I show you versus the orbital rate divided by the spin rate. So of course the Earth is at 27 days. 27 is the orbital period of the moon. And the yellow zone is a parameter range where the frequency condition is not matched. So we can't have any instability here, just because the frequencies are not tuned enough. So you see that Venus is exactly in this yellow zone, so we do not expect any instability for Venus, whatever the viscosity, whatever the forcing. Okay. For the other stuff, so Mercury is in the stable zone. Of course, Mercury does not have any moon, so tides are very small. For the Earth, it's complicated. The current Earth is just at the onset. Maybe it's unstable, maybe it's not, depending on the parameter we choose. For the early Earth, it's a bit better. Now, here, I only consider the viscous damping. But if you add the magnetic field damping, the magnetic diffusion in the equation, then the Earth fall down here. Okay? So what's the truth? Actually, it depends. If you assume that the magnetic field is there because of an external phenomenon like the convection-driven dynamo, then, of course, the instability to grow has to win against this existing magnetic field. So then you are here. But if you consider that the magnetic field is due to the turbulence driven by this forcing, then the magnetic field does not exist when the instability grows. So then you don't have any dumping at the beginning of the instability. So then you are here. Okay? So it really depends if you consider that the dynamo is due to tides in the early Earth, then you are unstable, or if the dynamo is due to something else, then you are stable. And just by the fact, early moon is different just because the moon was around 2 times closer, so you have a dimensionless viscosity which is smaller, and of course tides are much larger. So factor 2 means a factor 8 for the tidal displacement. Okay, so that's enough for theory. Let's see now the saturation of the instability, and of course because it's nonlinear, then theories become very difficult, so we do simulations then. And to do simulation, we need to simulate an ellipsoid. And that's not obvious. In seismology, they know how to do that, but in fluids, in particular in planetary core dynamics, they all use spherical codes. We will see why later. And spherical codes use spectral method, and here it's not relevant because we really need a deformation. Okay? So we will use a finite elements code, which is called COMSOL here. We can use any finite element code, I just use that for convenience. And we will solve the Navier-Stokes equation under the hypothesis of incompressibility. And basically, I remind you, the motor of instability is the ellipticity, equatorial ellipticity of the core, and the damping is the dimensional viscosity. So we need that to be larger or strong enough compared to that. Okay? And we will imply that. So we will implement that in COMSOL, so imposing a tangential velocity along the monary, which makes the fluid rotate. Okay? This is easy, it takes 5 minutes in COMSOL, so you can also try yourself. So here I show an isosurface of velocity, meaning I show all the points where the velocity is 15% of the velocity at the boundary. Okay? And this is the parameter I use, so strong ellipticity, 0.32, dimensional viscosity of 10 to the minus 3, and this is the polar flattening I chose. So first, of course, the field has to be put in rotation, exactly as in the experiment we have seen today. So this is why the isosurface of velocity is shrinked. And then you see that the rotation axis of the field is tilted. And this is exactly what we have seen yesterday in the experiment. Okay? So we recover exactly what we've seen. You see that we have good correspondence here. And if I show you the vertical, the axial velocity integrated on the volume, you see the spin-up stage, so the spin-up of the fluid, then the growth of the instability, and finally the saturation. It's okay? So really here, you establish the base flow, so here you have 0, then you have elliptical streamline, then elliptical streamline are destabilized, and then it tilts, and it stabilizes like that. Okay, so you can fit here an exponential growth like that and obtain the growth rate, and numerically you obtain 0.05. And you can compare that with a theoretical analysis, because here we are in the linear stage, so we can do some theory, and it works quite well. If I represent sigma divided by the ellipticity and in the horizontal axis the damping, you see that if the ellipticity, which is the color here, is not too strong, then it works very well. The linear stability analysis equation here fits all the data. Okay? Of course, the theory is done for small ellipticity, so when the ellipticity is as large as 0.9, it doesn't work. But 0.9 is no planets have such an ellipticity, so we don't care. Okay, so the numerical model is validated. It means that the COMSOL is able to capture the main physical ingredients. So now, to answer one of the questions of yesterday, if we do have buoyancy, because we know that planets have buoyancy either convecting or stably stratified, but the question now is, can we drive such an instability if we have a buoyancy force due to compositional, due to temperature, or whatever? So to do so, I take the same model, here, the same equation, I just add the temperature equation, okay, and I consider a shell. So I use the Boussinesq approximation, you have seen with Philippe. So the fluid is still incompressible. And we impose a difference of temperature between the inner core boundary and the core mantle boundary, okay? And depending on the temperature difference I impose, I can have basically 4 regimes. First, I can be stably stratified. So here the fluid is cold, it is hot, so the fluid is denser here, lighter here, and everything is stable. We can be unstably stratified, so it means that I heat here, I cool down here, but not enough to drive convection. I'm below the onset of convection. Then convection sets in, so you got convection, and you got columns because of Taylor-Prudman theorem. So this is the Bousseux column. There are different names for that, but okay, this is the convection. We do not heat too much. And the last regime is the one you have in the sun. If you heat a lot, then Coriolis force does not make columns because the temperature contrast is too large. Okay? And the Earth, of course, is expected to be in this regime. Sorry. So I'll just remind the definition of the Rayleigh number here. And the question here is, who wins? Who wins between tidal instability and convection? For the Earth, for instance. So let's do the simulation. So if I do the simulation in a sphere, of course, we recover the usual convective columns, because we don't have any ellipticity, so I start from that, and suddenly I squeeze my sphere into an ellipsoid. So here I'm in the rotating frame, and here I come back to the inertial frame because I don't want my shape to move in time. I want to solve the fluid in the frame where the shape is fixed. So you will see that the booster columns are rotating much faster because I am in the inertial frame. And I show here, once again, the isosurface of points at 15% of the boundary. And you see that the fluid oscillates because of convection, but the rotation axis is tilted. So here, indeed, the elliptical instability grows on established convective motion. It can grow even if we have convective motion. Of course, this is for the parameters of the simulation, so you can wonder if it holds for planetary parameters. So, to answer this question, I have shown here the growth rate of the instability versus the Rayleigh number. When the Rayleigh number is negative, it's stably certified. When it's positive, it's unstably certified, and convection kicks in here. Okay, so what do you see? You see that stratification is not a problem at all for instability. You still have instability, but if you convect too much, if you are too strongly convecting, then you lose the instability, as expected. Okay. So this is Rayleigh. You can also draw this kind of diagram for the Rossby number. Rossby number is the ratio between the RMS velocity in the fluid, the mean RMS velocity, and the rotational velocity. And you see that indeed, here the instability disappears for Rossby near 1. And we can expect that because imagine you've got convective motions, so your particle is on an elliptical streamline, and suddenly you've got a lot of perturbation because of convection. So then the particle forgets that it is on an elliptical streamline. They does a turn, and when it comes back, it's not at the same point. So, of course, if the velocity of convection is comparable to the velocity of the rotation along the ellipse, then you can't expect any instability. So it should be 1, it's not 1, it's 0.25. Okay. So now what about planets? So this simulation is for this Ekman number. If I divide by 3 the Ekman number, I have these curves. And imagine I have to go up to 10 to the minus 15. So the same here, planets are at Ekman number 10 to the minus 15. Whereas we know that the Rossby number in planets is 10 to the minus 6, and in stars is between 0.1 and 1. So we see that we won't have any trouble. All the curves will be shifted this way, and the Rossby number of planets is here. So really, for planet, it's not a problem. Maybe there are other problems which prevent this instability to grow, but convection will not prevent the elliptical instability to grow. And what is interesting is that, okay, and if we have now, in this regime, it means that we have a turbulence, we have flow, so then we have an advection and the transport of heat, right? Like convection, actually. So we have character as that. So here you see that I rotate faster and faster. This is why I show this opposite number of the Ekman number, so I rotate faster and faster. When I increase the rotation rate, the flow tends to stabilize, so maybe you don't know Nusselt number. You know Nusselt number? Have you seen it? This just quantify how much heat you transport in your fluid. So since you stabilize the flow, then the Nusselt number, the heat transport, is decreased. But suddenly, just because you rotate faster and faster, the instability starts, and it transports heat. So the transport of heat is increased again. Whereas in the sphere, where you don't have any instability, you don't have any transport of heat. Okay? So the instability participates to the heat transport. I don't comment on that, a bit difficult. So, okay, we have seen how it saturates close from the onset. You have seen that. You can ask me why. It's very surprising because in your simulation you got something like that, very laminar, and if we look at this movie, here it's very turbulent. Where was that? Here. So what makes the difference? The difference is that here we are very far from the onset. So in simulation we are close from the onset just because it's more tractable numerically here. So to go further from the onset, we have to use more efficient code. So here I show results from another code, NEC 5000, which is a finite which is not a finite element method, which is spectral element code. Okay, it's more efficient, so it allows to reach higher Reynolds number, so to go further in the turbulence regime. So this is the kind of mesh we use. So what is the difference between finite element and spectral element? Basically, this is the same kind of method. The difference is the order of polynomial. Here the order is 23, whereas for finite elements it's 1, 2, maybe 3, not higher. Okay. Do we have here a movie? Yeah, perfect. So I consider again here libration, and we recover exactly as in the experiment the fact that we have many inertial modes. You see that we have first a mode like that. It shows also the isosurface of velocity, and you will see that it degenerates into turbulence. So this is something which is difficult to reach with COMSOL. It's not efficient enough, and you see that it explodes from large scale to small scale. This is what characterizes turbulence. Okay. So this is interesting. Here, this is a decomposition in frequency versus time. So you see that first you have the base flow. At a certain time, you have apparition of the instability, but we are still laminar. We have 2 inertial modes, that's all. Okay, it's unstable. But then you have other parametric resonance of other inertial modes. And at the end, you've got many. And that makes this turbulence. This is what we call secondary resonances, because you first have one, and then you have a second one, and then a third one, and so on. At the end, you have many ones, and this is which makes turbulence. And actually, what happens that, okay, you've got your base flow, elliptical streamline, then you've got inertial modes, well organized, laminar, and you have seen that in my simulation I use very strong ellipticity. This is because I can't do very small viscosity, so I need to compensate by using strong amplitude of deformation and so on. So it works for the linear stage, but for the nonlinear effects, you can't do that. You need really to have a small viscosity. That is why we need to go to small Ekman number. And then we find with they find with this code that you can have 2 different manner to saturate. Either you have a lot of inertial resonance, like we just have seen, or either they self-organize to make strong zonal flows. The question, of course, here is: are the planets in this regime, or are the planets in this regime? It makes a huge difference, because here the Taylor-Prudman constraint is broken. It's broken. You don't have any columns here, contrary to what it is expected in planets. But here you're still geostrophic. So to reach such a large number, we can't make an ellipsoid anymore. It's too costly. So we use, they use here a periodic box. Of course, periodic box is much faster to compute because it's just Fourier modes in every direction. So it's less relevant, but at the same time, you can do much better values closer than planetary parameters. Okay, so here it's an unbodied field. It's like we isolate the small parcels here and we just simulate these parcels. But it allows to tackle this transition. So this is a periodic box. You see that initially, as in the other simulation, you've got something quite laminar, and after a certain time, you've got a self-organization along columns. And you see here, if I split the kinetic energy in the geostrophic part and the non-geostrophic part, first got the growth here, then the geostrophic part appear. First it is it's much smaller than the other, but at the end, it dominates the energy, meaning that the whole flow is geostrophic. Okay. What happens in terms of inertial waves? So here I show a figure with which has been described by Jaromir Sharon. So we want to see if the flow is is dominantly given by inertial modes or not. So this is the dispersion relation of inertial waves, and if all the points are on this line, it means that I have only inertial waves in my flow. If I have points everywhere, it means that I have something else like geostrophic flow. So you see that first, indeed, points are more or less on this line, more or less, but you start to have geostrophic modes here. And at the end, geostrophic mode had invaded the whole thing, meaning that You can't describe this thing with only inertial waves. Okay, but there is a key ingredient which is missing here. Because we are in a periodic box, we have no friction on the boundary at all. Whereas we know in Planet that the friction is important, especially because you expect columns. A column goes through the fluid, and there is some friction at the bottom and at the top. So we need to add in the model some friction at the top and at the bottom, because you can expect that, okay, we have a large thing like that, but just because we have no friction here, it can grow. But if we add enough friction, of course, such a structure cannot appear. And that's what we observe. So we add an equation to damp the velocity of the geostrophic mode. And if we do so, then you see that the flow is much more aligned on the inertial wave dispersion relation. So we are not geostrophic anymore. And you see, it's better and better. If you decrease the parameters from what we do in ellipsoid to what is closer from planetary regime, really, you have points all along the dispersion relation. Okay, so we can have two regimes, the geostrophic one and what they call the inertial wave turbulence. What about planets? Where do we are? So it's difficult to answer, but we work on that. So first, you have to be larger than the damping, always, to have instability. So you have to have instability, you have to be above this line. Below that, the strength, the LTC is not strong enough to drive anything. Then, in this area, this is where we expect the geostrophy flow. And here, this is where we expect the 3D wave turbulence. And the geophysics is here. So basically, you can have all the cases of figure. You can be stable, you can have wave turbulence, or you can be geostrophic. It really depends on the planet you look at. Okay? So what about dynamo? Sorry, again equation, but I'm sure you're used to that. So to have dynamo, once again, I use the same equation, the Navier-Stokes equation with viscosity, but I add the Lorentz force, G cross B. It seems complicated just because I have written the Lorentz force with the vector potential. Okay? So B is the curl of A. And why do I use a vector potential? Just because with that I'm sure that B is free divergent. And this is the induction equation, but written with the vector potential. That's all. But otherwise, you can write it with B. So the idea is to have here an elliptical instability, or a mechanically forced instability. And here I have to solve the exterior domain, which is insulating. It's strange, because if you do some dynamo calculation, usually you don't solve this domain. Why? It's because spectral methods are global. So you can impose conditions at the infinity. But finite element method is a local method. It means that you can only impose things at the point where you have a grid mesh. Okay? So you can't do that, and you need to solve the exterior domain. Okay, and we have here a new parameter number, which is a magnetic prop number, which is the ratio between the viscosity and the magnetic diffusivity. It's okay for everyone? So I use again COMSOL, which is well designed for such a multiphysics problem, and the induction equation is solved with Nedelec elements, whatever, and this is classical Lagrange element. And here I impose something local, so this is not physical, but we hope that we are far enough from the fluid such that we have no retroaction of the boundary on the dynamics, and we will have to check that, of course. And the last point, here the domain is not purely insulating, it is weakly conducting, because it's easier numerically. Okay, so I skip that just to explain that at the external boundary, I am not insulating. I impose surface currents, whatever. So the mesh is the following. We have the fluid in this tiny ellipsoid, and this is the sphere where we only solve the magnetic field just to impose its propagation. And you see that if I vary the ratio between the conductivity of the exterior domain and the conductivity of the fluid, when the exterior domain is not really conducting, you have a saturation. So here we are asymptotic, and the conductivity of the outer domain does not change anymore. So we will work in this area. So the first check is to impose a magnetic field, axial one. We impose one. Imagine you have Io, the liquid core of Io, which move in the magnetic field of Jupiter. So the magnetic field is here. Io won't modify the magnetic field of Jupiter so much, except by induction. So I take my ellipsoid here, and I impose an axial magnetic field due to another thing, like Jupiter. And if I do so, oops, okay, it is here sigma over beta, so the growth rate again. So you see that if I increase the imposed magnetic field, I decrease the growth rate. I stabilize the thing. And this is exactly what I told you before. The magnetic diffusion is a break, is a damping for the instability. So if I have too much viscosity, if I have a field which is too large, then I inhibit completely the growth of the instability. And here, I lose the instability when the imposed field is too large. So this is the Elsasser number. Maybe you have used it with Philips. So it's just the dimensionless imposed magnetic field. Okay, and this is something we recover with theory. Here you've got the growth rate without any damping. Here you've got the damping of viscosity, and you add a supplementary term here, which is damping due to the magnetic field. Okay, and of course to have instability, you need that to be larger than these two damping terms. Here I show you the same modes, the ohmic dissipation, the magnetic field, and so on. Here I insist, it's not dynamo, it's only induction. Okay, so we just modify a bit the external field, but we do not generate a dynamo effect. So what about dynamo? So let's first try some benchmarks. So classical benchmark are the Ponomarenko dynamo benchmark. Maybe you have seen it. It's a very simple thing. You've got basically here a metallic liquid or solid, whatever, which rotates and it goes forward like that, okay? Like a screw. And if you do that, then it's a dynamo, it's the simplest dynamo. Actually, it has been done experimentally. So here it works, we recover the values of the literature. We can do as well this dynamo, which is a kinetic VKS dynamo. Maybe you have seen von Karman sodium dynamo, the one which has been done in Cadarache. So it works as well. So now we can do kinematic dynamo in an ellipsoid. So this has been done not by me, but by this group with the code NEC 5000, and they do obtain dynamo for libration, for precession, and for tides. So they show here the vorticity of the fluid and the magnetic field they obtain. So you see that there is a problem, because okay, there is a dynamo, but see the magnetic field, it's not large scale at all. It's very small scale. So that's the first problem, because for the Earth, for instance, the field is large scale. The other problem is that it's only kinematic dynamo. So kinematic dynamo means that I have no Lorentz force. I have no retroaction of the flow, so it goes to infinity. Why? Just because I can't do dynamic dynamo with NEC 5000. It's too complicated. So I did it with COMSOL. So I start with a benchmark of dynamic dynamo, not only kinematic one. You really have to tackle self-consistent dynamo. You see the comparison here of my result with the one of Nathanael, so it worked quite well. And we did obtain the self-consistent dynamo in ellipsoid. We are with COMSOL. This is the first one, so we are really at the beginning. We obtained that this summer. So what happened is that the dynamo benchmark, which is the usual one, passed by any spherical code, it is lost as soon as the polar ellipticity is larger than 0.1%. Meaning that if you neglect the polar ellipticity, as done in any spherical code, it works. But as soon as you've got a bit of ellipticity, you lose it. And of course, you miss completely this phenomenon if you work only in spheres. So you see here that even a small ellipticity, again, can have strong consequences because we lose dynamo. So ellipticity is a crucial effect for dynamo, and you can't have it if you work with a spherical code. So what about, so all these dynamo were done with buoyancy force. What about precession, tides, and libration? This is something we are working on. So progress soon. Oof, I go fast. Okay. So now let's apply that to lunar dynamo. Okay, maybe I go a bit too fast, but so lunar dynamo, we have seen yesterday that we want to explain it with something else than convection. Convection does not work. And we have impact, but impacts explain only the antipodal correlation of crater and magnetic field, but not all the rocks we have. So to make a dynamo in the moon with mechanical forcings, as we have seen, we need that first tide is larger than dissipation, okay? And then we need a differential rotation large enough. Why do I say that? Because if I take an egg with fluid inside, and if I rotate it, after a certain time I have nothing. I just have a fluid with something like that. I really need that the bulge rotates differentially with the fluid, okay? But the moon is synchronized, so when the moon is synchronized, the fluid rotates with the tide, with the bulge, and nothing happens. So the idea here is really to have an impact, but this time we are not considering the cloud plasma and so on. We just consider that the impact will desynchronize the moon. It's large enough to desynchronize the moon. So during a certain amount of time, you have a mantle with the tidal frozen bulge, which rotates differently, and the field still continue to rotate at the same rate, just because it takes time for the field to accelerate. This is what we call the spin-up time. Okay, so the idea here is that you've got a desynchronization of the mantle tidal frozen bulge, and during the time that the fluid accelerates, you've got a differential rotation between the deformation and the fluid. Then you've got elliptical streamline, okay, and then you can expect instability. It's okay for everyone? Okay, we can use this theory to predict if it's possible in the moon or not. So you see here that we've got the motor of instability, the viscous damping, no magnetic damping because we want to drive the magnetic field with that. So there is no magnetic field before the growth of the instability, and the fact that we need to be non-synchronized. If the fluid rotates at the same rate of the deformation, that you've got zero instability. And of course, when it comes back to synchronization, it's not like a huge jumping and it stops. It oscillates. And during this oscillation phase, you can expect libration instability. So first you expect a toroidal instability with elliptical streamline, and then a libration instability. Okay? So again, it's a scenario based on crater, on impact, but not the same than yesterday. Okay, we know about that. So the idea is that we perturbate the rotation of the moon with an impact. Then we have turbulence, which makes the dynamo. So now we really have to study dynamo field with tides. But I just told you that we can't do that with COMSOL or with any code so far. So how do we do that? So we will use a trick. Okay, so finite element of spectral element as in COMSOL, NEC 5000, it works well, but it's too costly. So we have to use a trick. So we use a trick, and we will still consider a sphere. Because a sphere is capable of doing the dynamo problem, and is very efficient compared to all these methods. But we want elliptical streamline. So this is what we have done here in this paper. We have used a sphere, but we have include a body force in the Navier-Stokes equation such that we will have elliptical streamline. Okay? So it's a trick. Huh? I'm not sure it will give the same result than if I do the correct simulation in ellipsoid. This is something we have to check. But at least it allows prediction. So if I use the radius of the sphere as a length unit, if I use the rotation rate of the fluid as a time unit, and this unit for the magnetic field, I solve with the code, with the spectral code, sorry, I solve the flow in a spherical fluid domain, imposing a velocity at the boundary, okay? I use stress-free wall. This is the equation I solve, so induction equation, classical one, divergence of B0, same for you, and here you see that I have the Lorentz force, possibly, if I add it, but the important thing is that we have a force here, completely artificial. I have chosen this one, to have elliptical streamline. Of course, this force should be non-conservative, huh? Otherwise it goes in the pressure terms and it does nothing on the flow. Okay? Once again, Ekman number, magnetic prime number, and we choose the force such that it's zero at the boundary, of course, because the boundary is still spherical. So we don't want any ellipticity there. So the force is zero at the center and on the wall. You see, huh? Because it's written like that. And we have three control parameters: the strength of the force, which will characterize the tidal deformation, the damping of viscosity, and the magnetic prime number. And this is the streamline. So of course, the streamlines are circular near the boundary and elliptical in the center. Okay? So here I use a huge ellipticity just that, such that you see it. So you expect that the instability is able to grow here, but not here. And it is the case. If I do the simulation, you indeed obtain some kind of flow which oscillates like that if you force enough. So if epsilon is smaller than 10.4, you've got basically elliptical streamline, that's all. But if you force larger than that, then you've got elliptical instability. So we are happy because we have a code which is more or less spherical, so it's better than the periodic box code. But we have also the tidal instability here. So if now I switch on the dynamo, we do have a flow which is not completely small scale, not completely large scale, and which oscillate like that. So this is what I call slightly dipole-dominated magnetic field. So it's not completely satisfying. It's far from what we observe on the Earth, but at least it's better than what we observe for kinematic dynamo we have obtained in ellipsoid. Okay, so back to the moon. So we have some prediction now of the magnetic field on the dynamo. So the idea is the following: you got an impact on the moon, it desynchronizes the moon, or it just make it oscillating. Then you can have a tides-driven elliptical instability or a libration-driven elliptical instability, which makes a magnetic field during the time, and then it stopped when it resynchronized. Remember, you really need to stop dynamo because we don't observe any dynamo on the current moon. So you need to start it to have a strong field and then to stop it. So the idea here is that the impact melts the surface at the, in the crater, and then during the progressive cooling, you record in the rocks the ambient magnetic field. So you need also that the time scale match. Because if you cool down too rapidly, or if the instability grows too slowly, then the rock is cooled before you store any field in the rock. And we can also do some prediction on the magnetic field which is generated. And to do so, we will use the scaling force they use for buoyancy-driven dynamos or for convection-driven dynamo. So basically, we need that the magnetic number is larger than 1000. It means that we have dynamo. And the magnetic field at saturation will be given by this law, which is directly derived from the law they use in convection. So this is the scenario for the libration. So the impact is not strong enough to completely desynchronize the moon. And what I show here is the time for the instability to grow versus the distance between the Earth and the moon. Here, this is what the time of spin-up. Okay, we don't care about that. And we took care about that. Right? This is a magnetic field we expect from the law. And you see that, of course, I show all the values, but actually, the interesting thing is this line here, because this is the line where you are if you consider the Sea of Serenity with this large impact of 700 kilometers. And what you see is that, okay, we do have dynamo, we do have a field, but see the value, it's between 3 microtesla. If you remember well, we need much more than that. So, doesn't work very good. What about desynchronization? Desynchronization is a very large impact which completely desynchronizes the moon. No, okay, I switch my title, I guess. This is tidal, this is libration. Yeah. And but doesn't matter. What imports here is the field, and you see that once again the field is at most 1 microtesla. Okay, so typical scenario is the following: you've got no magnetic field, then you've got an elliptical instability which makes a magnetic field via dynamo effect, and then because the core of the moon resynchronizes with the mantle, the instability disappears. Okay, and you store it in the rocks. So the typical time scales are okay. The magnetic field amplitudes are quite okay with some points, but not with all the points. If you remember well, here we have 2.5 microtesla. 2.5 is here. So we explain some of the dots, but not at all this one. Okay, so the scenario is beautiful, but it doesn't work. And the other problem is that we cannot put a date on crater, and if we do so, the last one is this one, and we have magnetic rocks after this impact, meaning that to explain, for instance, this point, this scenario doesn't work. We need something else. What about precision then? We hope that precision is more efficient to drive a dynamo. Ah yeah, so here I've changed just off here, okay, like that. So what about precision? Can we drive a dynamo with precision? Okay, so once again, precision like that. So we have a rotation axis of the moon, which describes a circle like a top. But what is interesting here is this figure. Here I show the Earth-Moon distance versus time in green, and I also show the precession angle versus time. And it's excellent. Why? Because we see that the precession angle is very small currently. It's around 1.5 degrees, whereas it has been up to 50 degrees in the past. And because we need to stop our dynamo, it's a good starting point, because we can expect that such a large angle will drive a dynamo, and suddenly, because the angle is too small, we lose the dynamo. Okay? So just I remind you how it works. We have precision. Basically, we have seen that yesterday. Precision tilts the rotation axis. Okay, and because of this is in the bulk, we have a tilted flow. And here, of course, in the boundary layer, we have viscous layers, because here the rotation rate has to match the one of the mantle. So we have a rotation rate like that here, and they match here in the viscous layer. Of course, that is not very efficient for dynamo. We have seen that yesterday. A single inertial mode is not efficient. So we need, what I say, we need destabilization, we need instability, we need turbulence. And either the viscous layers are destabilized, or the implicit bulk, so the tilted rotation, is destabilized. Both cases are possible. This one can be studied in spheres, because we can do precision of a sphere. But this one, the tilt is due to the topography, so we really need to go beyond the sphere. So we'll do both, starting with sphere, because it's simpler. So once again, same scale, you are used to that now. Length, radius of the sphere, rotation of the sphere, so on, same equation. We always say the same, actually. Except that here, you have the Poincaré term, because you are in a frame here, which is non-inertial at all. So you got Coriolis. No, sorry, it's not the Poincaré, it's Coriolis. Okay, because it's not inertial. And we solve it with the code of Nathaniel Scheffer, which is online for free, available online for free, so you can download it if you want. And we solve the field in a shell here. Previously, before our simulation, we did have only 20 saturated simulation of dynamo in sphere. Here we have done 1,000 simulations. The idea is to derive some scaling laws. We need a lot of simulation to do that. And I remind you the values for the core of the moon and the values we can reach with this code, which is the most efficient one in the world. So we can't do better with another code. And basically they are quite correct, except as usual, these two one. So when you have to be critical about a work on dynamo, you just have to look two numbers. The Ekman number, the magnetic point number. They are always far larger than those on planets. So I remind you, the moon here is at 10 to the minus 5 for PM, 10 to the minus 5 to the minus 6. This is the Ekman number here. And the simulations are there. So you see, we extrapolate these two numbers on many decades. Okay? This is the case for any dynamo simulation. So we are confident that this is quite correct, but here we will need to extrapolate, and that's why we need a lot of simulation to obtain reliable scaling laws. So in our simulation, here we don't have topography, so we observe mainly viscous effect. So what are the viscous layers? You've got the Ekman layer here, Have you seen it with Philip? Okay. So Ekman layer here. At some point, you've got a collapse of the Ekman layer, which means that you have some fluid which is ejected into the bulk of the fluid, and you've got the same at the inner boundary, at the inner core boundary, viscous layer, and you've got strong ejection of fluid here. And we recover all that with in the simulation. You see that you see this layer which are called internal shear layer. Okay. The question here is, can we have instability from these layers? So first, these two layers can be destabilized. Purely viscous, it's like you will do vortex and so on. But you can also have, why not, parametric instability due to this layer, because here you are in the bulk, so you can expect that we could have instability due to internal shear layer due to ICB or CMB. And we will have a good criterion to discriminate if it is that or not. If it is separated by 1, the two azimuthal one over, then it's really a parametric instability due to precession. 1 because it's precession, 2 would be tight. Okay. So I put some simulation here. You see that we have a good theory to separate between stable simulation and unstable simulation. Okay, we are happy with that. What about the instability? So here I show an antisymmetric energy, whatever, it's an energy component. See that we have nothing here. Suddenly we have a growth and a saturation. And if we split the flow into different m, you see that we have exactly what we want. 1m equals 17, 1m equals 18, they are separated by 1, so we are sure that this is a parametric instability due to precession. Okay? Here, because the parameters are not too strong, we have a single simple resonance. But if I increase a bit the parameters, so here look at the Ekman number, it's the same, but the Poincaré number, which quantifies is the same? No, it's not the same. 0.5 here. So it's not a strong modification, it's -8, -8.5. You see that you've got the primary instability, then the second resonance, and then you've got some quasi-periodic state with such flow like that. Whereas here we are quite laminar. And we can crank up a bit more the parameters, and then you've got something much more turbulent, with turbulence in the flow and with some self-organization into vortex. Okay? So it's a bit better, and you see that because it's a sphere, we can do extreme parameters. So because we have large-scale vortices here, it's exactly like LSV, like you observe in convection, like in the work of Céline-Gervilly, for instance, and we can expect that it drives the dynamo then. So let's look at the moon first. Do we have these instabilities in the moon? If we don't have this instability, we can stop at this point. So because we have good theory, as I've shown you, our theory to predict if there is an instability or not works quite well. So we can do the same for the moon. And here, when the curves here are larger than 1, we expect instability. Instability occurs at 1. So I plot how it varies over time for the moon. And you see that we are between 100 and 10 to the 4, so we are sure to be unstable. We have a lot of margin compared to 1. So we expect that we will be turbulent due to the boundary layer instability. And then you can compare what you obtain with the empirical model we did have before, and it's a bit better, it's in agreement, but if we compare, for the moon we need to be on the black line. So you see that the laminar flow doesn't work, you do not explain the dissipation we observe on the moon. Okay? So we are sure that the lunar core is turbulent. So that was the instability associated with the Ekman layer and the instability associated with the internal shear layer, so this one. This one is here. So this one is less unstable, but still we have factor 10 today and 100 in the past. So two important things. First, according to that, the lunar core is still turbulent today. Probably not enough to drive a dynamo, but it was much more turbulent in the past. That's a good thing. So we switch on the magnetic field, and we do observe dynamo. So here I show at the surface the radial magnetic field, in the bulk the axial vorticity, and here this is the strength of the magnetic field in the bulk, and once again the radial magnetic field. So you see that it's quite encouraging actually, because you have large scale vortices, quite geostrophic here, so you can expect something good at the boundary. Actually it's not really good, because you see there is a lot of small scale thing here. So we will see that there is indeed a problem. And there is another problem, is that we observe surprising behaviors that we have never observed with convection-driven dynamo. We observe self-killing dynamos. So the dynamo first grow, so the flow is dynamo capable, and then it disappears and never grow again. So it's very surprising. And actually, if I show versus time the rotation of the flow here, how it's modified by this dynamo, you see that at first we are here, so this flow is dynamo capable, the dynamo grows, and then the flow is trapped in this state where it's not dynamo capable anymore. In some sense, it's good for the moon, because it means that we could have started a dynamo which has killed itself, something we haven't seen for convection-driven dynamo. Of course, we also have stable dynamo, which is much more classical, and we have some intermittent dynamo where we can have fluctuation on the magnetic energy. You see that it almost disappears, it reappears again. That's the same that for convection-driven dynamo. It's excursion, if you want. But this behavior is new. It's very surprising if you think about it, because you don't have any magnetic field at the end. So you could think, okay, I don't have magnetic field, I will come back to this state, and it will grow again. But it's not the case, just because it's a non-linear system. If you are on a certain point, you can stay forever on this point. Okay, so what about the moon now? So here I show the onset of dynamo. If we are above this line, we are dynamo. If we are below, we have no dynamo. So once again, the same, I take the worst parameters, so magnetic prime number, Ekman number. We know that for the moon, we are here, 10 to the 15 and 10 to the 6, and this is the kind of simulation we do have before our work. So this guy, Andreas Tinier, concludes from his work, okay, it will work. See, if I extrapolate on many decades, I will put the moon and I will be above this line. Fair enough, so let's do a bit more, because it's an old work now, so we can do more extreme parameters. Actually, it does not behave at all as is expected. The curve increases again, meaning that if the moon is here, we lose dynamo. Okay, the onset, we recover like him, the same thing, but if we extrapolate this line, do something like that. So it's not encouraging. And what happens? Actually, what happens is that we have some small scale instability near the CMB, which completely destroys the dynamo. Something it doesn't have here. So I just show here 2 points. This one, okay, everything behaves very normally. You don't have small scale. Everything is correct. You think it will go forever like that. And actually, if you look at this point, not at all. You have a lot of small scale instability at the boundary, and that's what destroys the dynamo. And if I look at the field, you see that it's very small scale. So if I extrapolate from the core mantle boundary to the surface, I will have a very weak field. So I won't explain the data. So is there any hope? According to that, no. But we do have this way of destabilizing the flow. Okay, we have only looked at Ekman layer and so on because we were in a sphere. But now, if we have some ellipticity, maybe it changed. Once again, it's hard to simulate the exact problem. So I did another trick. Instead of using a body force here, so I solve the same induction equation, you know it. But here I do the same thing that we have done at the very beginning of this lecture. I decompose the velocity field into a base flow plus the perturbation. Okay? And the trick is there. It's the fact that in the base flow, I will put elliptical streamline. Okay? So the velocity, perturbation velocity, I do not solve the total flow, I only solve the perturbation velocity in a stress-free sphere. And what I impose is simply the tilted rotation. Okay? So I impose that the base flow, I impose it in the equation, is a tilted rotation plus an elongational flow. Of course, it's a bit wrong, because I impose a base flow which is not solution in that sphere. So I hope that my flattening is small enough such that the error I do near the boundary is not too strong. Of course, if I find a flow near the boundary, then I know that I'm wrong. Once again, it's a trick. So what do I observe? Once again, the growth of the instability, at first it looks like that. So growth m equal 8 in the azimuthal wave number. This is the kinetic energy. And I have a saturation, and what is funny is that the saturation is completely geostrophic. So when core dynamicists see this kind of flow, they are very happy because we expect geostrophy, we expect large-scale thing, because if you want large-scale dynamo field, we want large-scale flow. So we obtain quasi-geostrophic flow. They are similar to the large-scale vortices we have seen, and actually it is due to the inverse cascade. All the energy cascade toward the large scale. And if I switch on the magnetic field, I do have a growth. It means that this flow is dynamo capable. Okay? And here I check that the field is not completely created by things near the boundary. I know that I'm quite wrong near the boundary. So I don't want anything happening near this boundary. And it's okay because all the field is concentrated in the bulk. So I'm okay, even if I'm wrong here, I do not care because it's a very small field. And you see that the field which is created is really large scale, dipolar, like we want for planets. So really it's a new family of precession dynamo. And this new family arises because of the ellipticity. So now we hope that this kind of finding will hold in a true ellipsoid. So we have now a scenario which compares well with what we expect for the early lunar dynamo, and you see that here precession is a promising candidate to explain the lunar dynamo. Okay, so we have need that it is turbulent but not dynamo capable. Topography is better because topography gives good field. So is topography unstable for the moon? As usual, we need the motor, so we need the ellipticity of the moon to be larger than the damping. And you see that below 1, as before, below 1 we are stable, above 1 we are unstable. Currently we don't have any instability due to topography in the moon, because the damping is too strong, but in the past we do have an instability which would have appeared near this epoch. So it's very good, because we do need an instability here to drive the dynamo. Okay, but predicting the magnetic field strength is much more difficult because we need scaling law, and so far I have maybe 2 simulations like that, so I can't do any scaling laws with that. So once again we can use the law derived from buoyancy driven dynamo. So this is what they did here, and they do obtain a field between 1 maybe 30 microtesla, but which is not enough compared to data. But what they have done here, they do not they consider that stratification is a problem for this instability. However, we have seen that it is not a problem. This instability grows over stratification. So here they make an error. And actually, indeed, if I take into account the topography of my dynamo, if I remove this stratification, I have much more larger field here, because the field geometry I know is large scale, whereas they have considered small scale geometry, or at least similar scale to the Earth, and I know that stratification is not a problem. So then we do have much better field, which would explain the dynamo. Okay, but here I say stratification is not a problem for the instability. That's true. But is it a problem for dynamo? That's something we have not seen yet. So we need to study stably stratified dynamo due to tides. Because stratification maybe allow turbulence to grow, okay, but maybe it completely inhibits, maybe it's not dynamo capable. So blah blah blah, okay. And the framework is the star Vega, which is completely stratified. So It can be the moon, it can be Vega, it can be the stably stratified layer of the Earth, whatever. For us, it will be a stably stratified fluid. Okay. So, just remind you, so when stars appear, they're completely convecting, okay? When we are below this mass, you are like the sun with a radiative zone in the interior, but you can also have, for other stars which are more massive, like Vega, you can be fully radiative or with a small convective core. Okay, you remember, we are interested by these red stars here, because they are dynamo a priori and they are stratified. So we have seen that, okay, tides can drive dynamo in neutral or convective fluid, but with stably stratified fluid, we didn't have studied that. So here I add another dimensionless number, which is a Brunt-Väisälä frequency. Have you seen it? No? Yes? Okay. Brunt-Väisälä frequency is just the fact that if you are in a stably stratified fluid, if you move a parcel of fluid down or up, it will go back to the initial position with a small oscillation. And the period of the frequency of the oscillation is the Brunt-Väisälä frequency. Just because the Archimedes force is a restoring force. When this number to the square is larger than 0, then the fluid is stably stratified, and then you can have internal gravity waves. So we'll do again the hypothesis of Boussinesq fluid. We will consider a barotropic state. Barotropic means that, it means that Nabla-T cross G, the gravity equals 0. It means that we have no baroclinic instability. We don't want that because it's another instability, and we want to focus on the tidal instability. Okay? And we consider linear gravity as it is usual for planetary cores. Same scales, basic state, Ekman numbers, you are used to that. For planets, it's this kind of numbers. And the equation we solved here is more complicated. We have, as before, we have the basic flow here, I impose to have elliptical streamline. We have the Lorentz force, and here we have a supplementary equation because we need to solve the temperature equation. Okay? And you've got here damping terms for the instability. Okay, so here we choose the base flow to be the following. We are circular at the center, circular at the boundary, and we have elliptical streamline here at mid depths of the core. Okay, so the ellipticity is smaller here, 0.2 at the maximum, smaller here. And the Brunt-Väisälä frequency evolved from 0 to 1, so we really are stably stratified. You see the temperature here, it's varying like that. So here we impose basic flow, we impose a basic state for the temperature, and we hope that the instability will grow. Actually it does if the strength is large enough, once again. And you can plot the energy of the perturbation versus n over omega. Why n over omega? Here I compare the frequency of the stratification, Brunt-Väisälä frequency, so the frequency of the oscillation due to gravity, and the rotation rate. So when this number is equal to 1, you expect both effects to be comparable. So both, and exactly what you see, you have a strong influence of thermal stratification here, which completely decreases the energy of the flow. What is more striking, I have no explanation for that, is that the energy grows again. So if you completely stratify, then it's not a problem anymore for the instability to grow. Of course, here you have no temperature, you are at 0, and then it doesn't change too much when the Brunt-Väisälä frequency is not large enough. So here you have this kind of turbulence, as expected, because you don't have any influence of the temperature. But what happens here is that the turbulence starts to be self-organized, not self-organized, organized by the stratification. It's less turbulence, of course. So the basic flow, first we have to check that the basic flow is not dynamo capable. Of course it is not. Okay, so now we have to switch on the magnetic field and to integrate over one magnetic diffusive time, and then we do obtain dynamo. So the same graph, except that here I show the magnetic Reynolds number we reach in our simulation versus the same horizontal axis, so the ratio between Brunt-Väisälä and rotation rate. So you see that we do have dynamo here when the magnetic Reynolds number is larger than nearly 1000, exactly the usual number, the number we expect. And at some point we lose dynamo. So we hope that Vega, or the moon, is more in this area than in this area, because in this area we completely lose dynamo. So you see, it's not obvious that stratification will not modify things. Actually, here stratification inhibits the growth of the dynamo. And just to have a look, this is the kind of field you expect in the you expect and we obtain in the simulation in the field. So to come back to Vega, we can obtain a scaling law to predict the magnetic field on Vega based on this mechanism. So the idea is that we have a planet orbiting around Vega. It deforms the star into an ellipsoid. We have a tidally driven dynamo in Vega, and it drives the magnetic field of Vega. Actually, it's quite good, because if we consider the possible planets around Vega, and if we consider the magnetic field which has been measured on Vega, it is between that and that. No, sorry. Is that? Yeah, is that. And here, we predict with our scaling law a field on Vega around 1.5 Gauss, whereas we measure 0.6 Gauss. So we are quite happy because in terms of order of magnitude, it's really correct. So we can't use this argument to discard the possibility of tidal dynamo in Vega. And the perspective of this work is now to I have no time. Switch that, it's more complicated. So now we can go back to the moon and adapt the scaling law for moon precession. So you remember we were topographic unstable here, and we can use the scaling law to predict the field. And you see that we are quite happy because it works quite well. If we use the scaling law, then it stops there because the instability disappears. So actually you have a oblique decay, but it disappears quite rapidly. And here now the values are in agreement with the data. Okay, so is everything solved? Actually, I don't believe that's the story, because here the scaling law I obtained has been derived from convection-driven dynamo, and there is no good reason that it's exactly the same scaling law for mechanically driven dynamo. So maybe it works, it's encouraging, so we have to work further in this way, but we have to obtain the scaling laws governing these dynamos to be sure that this kind of prediction is correct or not. So I want to conclude now. So in the first lecture yesterday, we have seen that sometimes we need to go beyond the usual thermosolitary model. A way to do so is to use mechanical forcing, tides, precession, and so on, either because it forced direct resonances or because it forced parametric resonances in the field. But there are still many open questions. What are the scaling laws for mechanically driven dynamo? What are the compressibility effects? And what about if we combine forcing, like precession and tides together? And really the take-home message, and I will finish with this slide, is the following. If you observe a dynamo field on a planet, it doesn't mean at all that it is convecting below. It means that you have a flow, and that's all. And secondly, even if you are stably stratified, it doesn't mean that you have no flow and just a diffusive heat flux. You can have flows, dynamos, and advection, so a Nusselt larger than 1. And if you want to read more about all this stuff, these two references, quite recent, are very good. So Andreas Tinier and Keke Zhang, this is a book, and you can find it online. And I thank you for your attention. Do you have questions? That's your last chance. No? You need coffee now? Me too. Okay.